Beneath the indifferent gaze of a blood moon, a lone wolf's shadow bled into the eternal frost, whispering secrets of thrones long shattered. The wind howled like a betrayed lover through the jagged peaks of the Silverfang Range, carrying the scent of pine and impending doom. Alara stumbled forward, her paws sinking into the snowdrifts that clung to the earth like desperate fingers. Blood trailed behind her, warm at first against the icy bite of winter, but cooling swiftly into crimson crystals that marked her path, a scarlet thread unraveling from the wound in her side. The gash was deep, courtesy of the beta's claws, a parting gift from the pack that had once called her kin. Omega, they sneered, unfit for the warmth of the den, unworthy of the alpha's fleeting glance. But it was more than rejection. It was exile, a death sentence whispered under the full moon's judgment. She remembered the council's verdict in the flickering light of the communal fire, flames dancing like mocking spirits on the faces of those she had bled for. "The Deusa has turned her back," the elder had intoned, his voice gravel over stone. Her crime? A vision, unbidden and wild, a dream of shadowed halls and fangs that pierced not to kill, but to bind. They called it madness, a curse from the lunar spirits. Her alpha, Thorn, had not spoken in her defense. His eyes, once stormy with promise, now held only the chill of duty. He had marked her rejection with a single deliberate slash across her flank, the silver of his claws searing like holy fire. "Go," he had growled, turning away as the pack's howls rose in chorus, a dirge for the broken. Ilara's breath came in ragged bursts, fogging the air before her muzzle. The forest thickened here, ancient evergreens bowing under the weight of snow, their branches clawing at the starless sky. The air tasted of iron and frost, sharp against her tongue, mingling with the metallic tang of her own blood. She was no longer wolf in form. The shift had abandoned her miles back, pain too fierce to sustain it. Now she limped on two legs, her furred cloak torn and matted, the hem dragging through the powder like a funeral shroud. Around her neck, the silver locket swung with each faltering step, its chain a cold noose against her collarbone. Inside, a single drop of dried blood. Her mother's? Preserved from the night, she too had been cast out. It was her only heirloom, a symbol of the Omegas who came before, women whose whispers the packs dismissed as echoes of the wind. The pain in her side throbbed with every heartbeat, a rhythm that synced with the distant Weavos echoing from the mountains behind her. Were they pursuit, or just the wild calling to its own? Alara pressed on, driven by the primal instinct that had kept her alive through lean winters and rival skirmishes. The Silverfang Range bordered forbidden lands, territories whispered of in hushed tones around the fire, realms where the moon's children met their ancient foes, vampires, shadows with hearts of ice who drank not just blood, but the very soul of the night. To cross into their domain was to court oblivion, yet the pull of survival dragged her forward, the snow giving way to harder ground, where the trees thinned and the wind carried a new scent, decay, like roses long wilted. Her vision blurred, the world tilting as blood loss clawed at her edges. She collapsed against a frozen boulder, the stone's chill seeping through her cloak, numbing the fire in her wound. The locket slipped from her grasp, dangling open in the snow, the blood drop glinting under a shaft of moonlight that pierced the clouds like an accusatory finger. In that moment, delirium wrapped around her thoughts. What was strength, if not the mercy to endure alone? The Deusa's symbols flooded her mind, the lunar crescent tattooed on her wrist, faded now from neglect, the fire that had once warmed her dreams of belonging. But rejection had stripped it all, leaving only the raw ache of what might have been. Alara's eyes fluttered shut, the howls fading into a velvet silence broken only by the whisper of wind through bare branches. She did not hear the subtle shift in the air, the way the snow muffled footsteps that were not of beast or man. Nor did she sense the eyes upon her, ancient and unblinking, watching from the tree line where wolf territory bled into the shadowed veil of vampire domain. When consciousness clawed its way back, it was to the murmur of voices, low and resonant, like echoes in a cavern of ice. Alara's body ached on a bed of furs, soft and alien against her skin, the scent of aged stone and candle wax heavy in her nostrils. Her wound was bound, the sting dulled by something herbal and potent. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the dim glow of torches mounted on walls of polished obsidian. Guards encircled her, tall figures in armored cloaks of midnight blue, their faces pale as fresh snow, eyes gleaming with an otherworldly red hue. Vampires. The word lodged in her throat like a thorn. One stepped forward, his posture rigid with deference, a silver crest on his breastplate catching the firelight. "Majesty," he intoned, voice smooth as frozen silk. "You have awakened in the heart of Eldritch Spire. The king awaits your strength." Alara's heart thundered, the locket heavy against her chest. Majesty? The word was a cruel jest from a fever dream. Yet as the guards bowed, their movements precise and reverent, she felt the stir of something ancient within her, a pull, instinctive and denied, born from the blood that still whispered of destinies unspoken. The moon outside the narrow window hung low, bathing the chamber in silver, and for the first time since her exile, Ilara wondered if the Deusa's rejection had been a lie. Ilara's pulse echoed like a war drum in the cavernous silence of the chamber, each beat pulling at the fresh bandages that bound her wound. The air was thick with the scent of smoldering herbs and something deeper, metallic, blood, but not her own. It lingered like a promise unspoken, weaving through the chill that seeped from the obsidian walls. She sat up slowly, the furs sliding from her shoulders, revealing the faded crescent tattoo on her wrist, its silver ink dulled by the shadows of exile. The guards remained statue still, their red eyes fixed on her with a reverence that bordered on worship, as if she were a relic unearthed from forgotten myths. Majesty. The word twisted in her mind, absurd and intoxicating, a balm against the raw scar of rejection that Thorn's claws had left. One guard, the one who had spoken, extended a gauntleted hand, offering a chalice etched with lunar phases. "Drink, Majesty. The elixir will mend what the frost has claimed." His voice was a velvet murmur, carrying the weight of centuries, yet laced with an urgency that made her skin prickle. Ilara hesitated, her fingers brushing the locket at her throat. The dried blood within pulsed faintly, or so it seemed in her delirium, a tether to the wild heart of her pack, now lost beyond the veil of snow-capped peaks. She took the chalice, the liquid within dark and viscous, tasting of iron and wild berries crushed under moonlight. Warmth spread through her veins, dulling the ache in her side, but sharpening her senses to the peril of this place. Vampires. Eternal predators whose domains bled into the edges of wolf territories, where borders were drawn not in stone, but in the crimson spill of old wars. The chamber door groaned open on hinges forged from ancient iron, admitting a gust of wind that carried the howl of distant tempests. Torches flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the polished stone. And then he entered, the king, or so the air proclaimed him before her eyes could confirm. Tall and unyielding, cloaked in midnight velvet edged with silver thread that caught the firelight like veins of moonlight. His hair fell in raven waves to his shoulders, framing a face carved from marble, high cheekbones, a jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, rimmed with that same unearthly red. But it was the weariness in his posture that struck her deepest, a subtle hunch, as if the weight of unseen crowns pressed upon his shoulders. He was no mere lord of the night. He bore the mark of one haunted, his skin pale, not just from undeath, but from battles etched into his soul. He paused at the threshold, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. In that moment, The world narrowed to the space between them, the locket's chain swaying gently against her chest, the faint scent of pine and blood mingling with his own, like aged wine laced with frost. An instinct stirred within her, primal and unbidden, a pull that whispered of bonds forged in the Deuce's loom. Not the raw heat of pack loyalty, but something colder, deeper, like the moon calling to the tide. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the wind that had driven her here, yet curiosity bloomed alongside it, a fragile flower in barren soil. Who was he? This Shadow King, to look upon her as if she held the key to his unraveling. Lyrian, the guard murmured, bowing lower. The Omega from the Silverfang borders. She crossed the veil wounded, as foretold. Lyrian's lips parted, a flicker of surprise crossing his features before it hardened into regal composure. He approached with measured steps, the soft crunch of his boots on the fur-strewn floor echoing her heartbeat. Up close, she saw the scars, faint lines across his throat, hidden beneath his collar, remnants of a betrayal long past. Guilt shadowed his eyes, a melancholy that mirrored her own exile's ache. "You are far from your lands, Wolf," he said, his voice a low rumble, resonant as thunder over frozen lakes. There was no mockery in it, only a quiet command laced with something akin to sorrow. What brings an Omega to the heart of Eldritch Spire, bleeding the blood of the moon's children? Ilara's throat tightened, the chalice forgotten in her lap. She should have snarled, shifted if her body allowed, fled back to the wilds where rejection was at least familiar. But his presence anchored her, the air between them charged with an electric denial. "Exile," she whispered, the word tasting of ash and snow. "My pack, they deemed me cursed, visions of shadows and bindings. I stumbled here seeking death, not thrones." Her hand instinctively touched the locket, the dried blood within a silent witness to her mother's fate, another Omega cast into the void, her whispers dismissed as madness. Lyrian's gaze dropped to the locket, his expression fracturing for a breath. "Cursed," he echoed, a bitter smile ghosting his lips. "We are all marked by such shadows in these halls." He knelt before her, an act so intimate it sent a shiver through her core, his hand hovering near but not touching the wound's binding. The heat from his palm was illusory, a vampire's chill masked by will, yet it stirred the embers of empathy she thought long extinguished. In his eyes she glimpsed his own fracture, a king who had lost his queen to treachery, her blood staining the spire's stones under a blood moon much like this one. Duty had chained him to the throne, guilt a crown of thorns he wore in silence. The connection hummed, instinctive yet resisted, a spark of recognition born from shared isolation. Fear warred with the curiosity that urged her to lean closer, to unravel the enigma before her. What was redemption, if not the mercy to see one's wound reflected in another's gaze? Outside, the wind howled, carrying weavos that blurred the line between wolf and vampire, ally and foe. Lyrian rose, extending a hand. "Rest here, Ilara. The spire's walls hold secrets that may mend more than flesh." But as she placed her palm in his, cool and steady, doubt lingered like frost on her skin. This was no refuge. It was a precipice where curiosity could bloom into alliance or plummet into deeper exile. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The shadows of Eldritch Spire stretched like grasping fingers across the chamber floor, the torchlight wavering as if hesitant to illuminate the fragile truce forming in its heart. Ilara's hand lingered in Lyrian's grasp a moment too long, the coolness of his skin seeping into her warmth like moonlight dissolving frost. She withdrew slowly, the locket at her throat a sudden weight. its hidden blood drop thrumming with the echo of her mother's unspoken warnings. Trust no shadow that calls you queen. Yet here she was, ensnared in a web of velvet deference and crimson eyes, the vampire's reverence a mirror to her pack's scorn, both equally bewildering. Lyrian straightened, his cloak whispering against the stone as he turned toward the arched window, where the blood moon hung swollen and accusatory over the jagged spires. "The borders stir tonight," he murmured, his voice a low cadence that resonated through her bones. "Your pack's howls carry farther than you know, Omega. They scent not just your blood, but the fracture in our peace." His eyes, storm gray rimmed with red, flicked back to her, holding a depth of sorrow that pulled at the frayed edges of her isolation. Guilt, she recognized it now, etched in the faint tremor of his jaw, the way his fingers flexed as if grasping at ghosts. He was no unchained predator. He was a king bound by the chains of his own making, a throne built on the ashes of betrayal. Ilara rose from the furs, testing her strength, the elixir's warmth uncoiling the knots of pain in her side. The wound pulsed faintly, a reminder of Thorn's rejection, but the bandages, woven with threads that shimmered like spider silk under moonlight, held firm. She stepped closer to the window, the chill air kissing her face, carrying the distant rumble of thunder and the sharp tang of ozone mingled with pine. Beyond the spire's walls, the snow-swept valleys blurred into a white void, but she sensed them, the silver-fang wolves, their forms blurring at the edges of vampire territory, drawn by the scent of spilled blood and forbidden crossing. Not pursuit for her alone, but a raid, opportunistic and vengeful, testing the ancient accords that kept fangs and claws at bay. A sudden clamor echoed from the corridors, boots on stone, the clash of steel, and a guttural snarl that twisted her gut. Wolf. The guards tensed, their hands drifting to hilts etched with lunar crescents, symbols borrowed from her world's lore, yet twisted into something eternal and cold. Lyrian moved with predatory grace, positioning himself between her and the door, his body a shield of shadowed muscle. "Stay behind me," he commanded, but there was no arrogance in it, only the quiet resolve of one who had lost too much to risk another fracture. Empathy flickered in Ilara's chest, unbidden, a recognition of the duty that isolated him, much as her visions had isolated her from the pack. He was marked by guilt. She saw it in the scar peeking from his collar, a jagged line from a queen's final betrayal. Her blood, the ink of his eternal remorse. The door burst open, admitting a whirlwind of fur and fury. 2 silver-fang betas, their eyes wild with the moon's frenzy, claws extended and lips curled in snarls. Behind them, the scent of smoke and blood, torch fire from the outer walls where the raid had breached. "Traitor's den!" one bellowed, his voice a guttural roar that shook the tapestries. "The Omega's blood calls us home." They lunged, not at the guards, but at Ilara, their forms half-shifted, muscles rippling under frost-matted fur. Rejection fueled their rage. She was the curse they sought to erase, the exile whose visions had foretold shadows encroaching on their lands. Lyrian intercepted the first, his movements a blur of lethal elegance, fangs bared in a hiss that chilled the air. He caught the beta's arm mid-swipe, twisting it with a crack that echoed like breaking ice, his red eyes blazing with controlled fury. The second beta circled, aiming for Ilara, but she did not cower. Instinct surged, the locket warming against her skin as if her mother's blood stirred to life. She grabbed a fallen guard's dagger, its hilt cold and unyielding, and slashed at the beast's flank, drawing a line of crimson that steamed in the chill. Pain flared in her side, but she held, the act of defense knitting something deeper, a bond forged in the heat of shared peril. The guards joined the fray, their blades singing through the air, silver edges glinting like moonlight on snow. One beta fell, gurgling as Lyrian's hand clamped around his throat, not draining but restraining, mercy in the midst of war. "Enough!" the king growled, his voice cutting through the chaos like a winter gale. "She is under my protection. Tell your Alpha the spire claims no territory, only what fate delivers." The surviving Beta whimpered, shifting back to man form, his eyes wide with the shock of vampire restraint. He scrambled away, dragging his kin's body, the door slamming shut behind him amid the fading echoes of howls. Silence descended, heavy as fresh snow, broken only by the crackle of a toppled torch and Alara's ragged breaths. Lyrian turned to her, a smear of blood, Wolf's, not his, marring his cheek, his chest rising and falling with unneeded air. Up close, the melancholy in his gaze softened, empathy blooming into something tender, a bridge across the chasm of their worlds. He reached out, wiping the dagger from her hand gently, his touch lingering on her fingers. "You fight like one born to thrones, not exiles," he said softly, the words a confession wrapped in wonder. The locket caught the firelight, its chain a link between their wounds, hers fresh and bleeding, his ancient and scarred. Ilara met his eyes, the pull between them no longer denied but acknowledged, a quiet flame kindling in the cold. Fear lingered, rationalized as the instinct of a lone wolf. Yet the curiosity that had drawn her here deepened into trust, fragile as a thaw. What was a bond, if not the choice to shelter in the storm with another broken soul? Outside, the wind howled its approval, carrying the scent of blood and possibility, while the blood moon watched, its light pooling on the floor like spilled secrets. But as Lyrian's hand brushed her arm, guiding her back to the firs, doubt whispered, refuge or snare. The spire's walls closed in, protective yet confining. And Ilara wondered if healing her fracture would demand she mend his, or shatter them both. The blood moon's gaze pierced the narrow window of Eldritch Spire like a silver dagger, casting elongated shadows that wove through the chamber like threads of forgotten prophecies. Ilara sat amid the firs, her body still humming from the skirmish, the dagger's weight absent from her palm, but its echo lingering in the faint tremor of her fingers. Lyrian's touch had withdrawn, yet the chill of it clung to her skin, a spectral warmth that stirred the embers of something unnameable within her core. The locket at her throat felt heavier now, its chain a subtle pulse against her pulse, as if the dried blood inside, her mother's silent legacy, sensed the unraveling of veils long drawn. Lyrian paced the chamber's edge, his cloak trailing whispers over the obsidian floor, each step measured against the distant clamor of guards reinforcing the outer walls. The raid's remnants echoed faintly, muffled snarls from the valleys below, the acrid bite of smoke threading through the stone corridors. His eyes, rimmed with that eternal red, flicked to her repeatedly, a king's vigilance masking the fracture beneath. Guilt, she saw it etched deeper now, in the tight line of his shoulders, the way his hand absently traced the scar at his throat. A mark from the night his queen's betrayal had spilled her blood across these very halls, binding him to a throne of remorse. He was no conqueror of shadows. He was their prisoner, ethical to a fault, his melancholy a crown heavier than any forged in silver. "You should not have fought," he said at last, his voice a low rumble that cut through the silence like wind over frozen peaks. He stopped before her, kneeling once more, his gaze level with hers, searching. "An Omega, wounded and alone, yet you drew blood as if the Dusa herself guided your hand." There was no accusation in his tone, only a quiet awe that bordered on confession, pulling at the threads of her isolation. Ilara's breath caught, the air thick with the scent of spilled wolf blood, and the herbal tang of the elixir still coursing through her veins. Fear coiled anew, rationalized as the instinct of one who had known only rejection's sting, but beneath it, curiosity bloomed unchecked, urging her to bridge the chasm between their worlds. She touched the locket instinctively, the metal warming under her fingers as if alive. "The Dusa," She whispers in visions, not victories, Alara murmured, her voice raw from the night's fury. My pack called it a curse. Shadows and bindings, fates intertwined under blood moons like this one. The words spilled unbidden, drawn by the empathy in his eyes, a mirror to her own exile's ache. Outside, the wind howled, carrying weavos that blurred into the spire's eternal hush, a symphony of peril that pressed against the walls like an unseen enemy. Lyrian's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition fracturing his composure. He reached out, his cool fingers brushing the locket's chain, not claiming but inquiring, the contact sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. "Show me," he urged softly, his melancholy yielding to a desperate hope. If the moon's children share such gifts, perhaps the night can bear witness. Doubt warred within her. Trust a vampire king, reveal the madness that had cost her everything? Yet the pull was instinctive, a lunar tide she could no longer deny. Rationalized as survival's gamble, it felt like destiny's hand guiding her palm to open the locket. The dried blood drop gleamed in the torchlight, unremarkable to the eye, but pulsing with latent power as her touch awakened it. Alara closed her eyes, the chamber fading into a swirl of introspection, her breath sinking with the distant thunder. The vision came not as a storm, but a slow unfurling, shadows coalescing into forms, the spire's halls alive with spectral figures. She saw Lyrian enthroned, his queen's betrayal replaying in crimson strokes, her fangs turning on him under a blood moon, not from malice, but a curse woven by rival clans, twisting love into venom. The guilt that chained him was no mere remorse. It was a binding, an ancient vampire rite that siphoned his strength, dooming Eldritch Spire to slow decay unless severed by one who could pathfind the threads of fate. Her hidden gift manifested then, raw and visceral, the Pathfinder's sight, dormant in Omegas like her, blooming under the moon's indifferent watch. Images flooded her mind, Lyrian's wound not of flesh, but spirit, a fracture that echoed her own rejection. She was the key, her visions the loom to unravel his curse, binding wolf blood to vampire shadow in a union that could redeem or destroy. The locket burned against her skin, the dried blood igniting in ethereal flame, projecting the revelation into the air between them. Holographic wisps of light forming a crescent path, leading from her exile to his throne, symbols of Deusa and night entwined. Lyrian's breath hitched, his red-rimmed eyes widening as the visions washed over him, the weight of centuries lifting for a heartbeat. He saw it all, her as the prophesied bridge, the Omega whose bloodline carried the lunar antidote to his eternal guilt. "You," he whispered, voice breaking like ice under spring thaw, "are the revelation I have awaited in shadows." Empathy surged between them, transforming the instinctive pull into profound acceptance, resisted no longer. His hand closed over hers on the locket, cool against her warmth, a vow unspoken. Yet, as the visions faded, leaving the chamber bathed in silver afterglow, a dilemma stirred in Alara's soul. To heal him meant embracing her gift's cost, sacrificing the freedom of exile for a destiny that demanded her blood's mingling with his shadows. What was strength, if not choosing to illuminate another's darkness at the risk of one's own light? The fire in the torches crackled, casting golden flickers on the blood-stained floor, while outside, the moon's light pooled like liquid mercy. Lyrian rose, pulling her gently to her feet, their bond a fragile flame against the encroaching storm. But in her heart, the ethical precipice loomed, redemption for him, or liberty for the wolf who had stumbled into fangs. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The obsidian corridors of Eldritch Spire wound like veins of night through the mountain's heart, their walls etched with runes that glowed faintly under the blood moon's unrelenting stare. Alara followed Lyrian in silence, her footsteps echoing softly against the stone. each one a hesitant bridge over the chasm of her revelations. The locket swayed against her chest, its chain a cool tether to the visions that had bound them. Her mother's blood now a conduit, pulsing with the weight of destinies intertwined. The air grew heavier as they descended, laced with the metallic tang of fresh conflict and the acrid bite of smoke from breached outer gates. Distant clashes reverberated, the ring of steel on claw, guttural snarls mingling with hisses of eternal hunger. The raid had swelled into invasion, silver-fang wolves pouring across the frostbitten borders, driven by Thorn's command, a alpha rival whose ambition festered like an open wound. Lyrian's cloak billowed behind him, a shadow swallowing torchlight, but his pace betrayed the fracture within, measured yet laced with the melancholy of one who had tasted betrayal's venom too often. He glanced back at her, his red-rimmed eyes holding a plea unspoken. Stay, heal what guilt has wrought. Empathy warred in Alara's core, the instinctive pull now a flame she could no longer rationalize away. Yet freedom whispered from the wilds beyond. The exile's solitude a mercy compared to this throne of shadows. What was love, if not the cruelest chain, demanding she forgive the pack that had scarred her, or wage war with the king who saw her worth? They emerged into the grand hall, a cavernous expanse where moonlight streamed through fractured skylights, painting the floor in silver pools veined with crimson. Bodies lay strewn, vampire guards with throats torn, wolves crumpled in pools of their own steaming blood, the air thick with the coppery reek of slaughter. At the hall's heart, atop a dais of frozen marble, stood Thorn, his form half-shifted, fur bristling along his arms, eyes blazing with the feral light of unchallenged dominance. Flanking him were the pack's enforcers, betas scarred from old skirmishes, their howls silenced now into predatory growls. The traitor among them, Kale, the elder who had first decried her visions as madness, lurked at Thorn's side, his gaze sliding over her with false contrition, the silver dagger at his belt glinting like a promise of further betrayal. "Ilara!" Thorn snarled, his voice a thunderclap that shook the hanging tapestries, claws flexing as if to reopen the wound he had inflicted. The curse returns, dragging shadows in her wake. We come to end it, to reclaim what the Deusa denies. His eyes flicked to Lyrian, contempt twisting his muzzle. Vampire filth, harboring our reject. The borders bleed because of her folly. The pack murmured assent, a chorus of rejection that clawed at Alara's heart, reopening the raw ache of her exile. They saw only the Omega, broken and unworthy, not the Pathfinder whose blood could mend fractured realms. Lyrian stepped forward, his presence a wall of unyielding night, fangs subtly bared in the torchlight's flicker. She is no curse, Wolf-King. The moon's weave has delivered her here to unravel bindings older than your pack's howls. His voice carried the weight of centuries, ethical restraint holding back the predator within, but guilt shadowed his words. The memory of his queen's fall, urging him toward mercy, not massacre. Yet as Thorn lunged, claws raking the air, Lyrian met him mid-stride, their collision a blur of fur and shadow, fangs clashing with a sound like shattering ice. Blood sprayed, warm and vital against the hall's chill, thorns drawing a hiss from Lyrian as it splashed across his scar, igniting old pain. Alara's breath caught, the locket burning against her skin as the vision surged unbidden, a moral crossroads etched in lunar light. She saw the threads, forgive Thorn's rejection, bind the packs in uneasy peace through her gift, or unleash war's fury, her blood mingling with Lyrian's to forge a new dominion. Freedom tempted, the wilds call a siren's song of solitude, unscarred by thrones or traitors. But love, resisted, rationalized, now insistent, demanded compassion, a choice to heal the alpha who had cast her out, mirroring the redemption she offered Lyrian. Kale circled the fray, his dagger flashing toward her back, the traitor's ambition unveiled in his sneer. "The visions were mine to twist," he confessed, voice slick as oil over snow. Thorn's ear, my whispers, your exile secured our raid on these eternal halls. Instinct propelled her. She shifted partially, claws extending as she intercepted Kale's strike, their blades locking in a shower of sparks. Pain lanced her side, the old wound tearing open, blood welling hot and slick down her arm. The locket swung free, snapping open in the struggle, the dried blood igniting in ethereal crimson light that bathed the hall. Visions erupted, visible to all. Thorn's rise built on Kale's lies, the pack's rejection a veil for greed. Lyrian's curse, born of a queen poisoned by similar treachery, now echoing in this blood-soaked standoff. The wolves faltered, howls turning to whimpers of doubt, while vampire reinforcements poured in, their red eyes gleaming with restrained hunger. Thorn broke from Lyrian, chest heaving, blood matting his fur as he faced her, the vision's truth fracturing his rage. "Alara, what have we wrought?" His voice cracked, the Alpha's pride yielding to the raw edge of regret. But freedom's shadow lingered in his stance. Would he bow to mercy or cling to power's war? Lyrian, wounded yet steadfast, placed a hand on her shoulder, his cool touch a anchor amid the chaos. "Choose, Pathfinder," he murmured, melancholy deepening his gaze. "Forgive their shadows, bind us all, or let war claim what guilt has spared." Alara's heart thundered, the blood moon's light pooling at her feet like a judgment rendered. The locket's glow faded, leaving her stained with her own crimson, the scent of iron and frost overwhelming. Compassion warred with the exile's justified fury. Love for Lyrian pulled her toward union, a moral leap into forgiveness that could redeem pack and spire alike. Yet liberty beckoned, a lone wolf's path unburdened by kings or kin. What was true strength, if not the mercy to forgive the blade that scarred you, even as it threatened to strike again? The hall held its breath, weavos and hisses suspended in the wind's howl, as her choice hung like a blade over the precipice of rebirth or ruin. The blood moon hung like a verdict etched in crimson frost over the grand hall of Eldritch Spire, its light fracturing across the marble dais where shadows and howls converged in a tapestry of fractured fates. Alara stood at the precipice, her blood, hot and defiant, seeping from the reopened wound, staining the stone in rivulets that steamed against the eternal chill. The locket dangled open at her throat, its dried blood dropped now a fading ember, the visions it had unleashed still lingering in the air like smoke from a sacred pyre. Thorn's eyes, wild with the unraveling of his illusions, met hers across the carnage, the Alpha's form trembling between fury and fracture. Lyrian's hand on her shoulder was a cool anchor, his touch weaving through the chaos like moonlight threading snow, yet heavy with the melancholy of one who knew the cost of crowns forged in guilt. The wind howled through the shattered skylights, carrying the distant weavos of the Silverfang pack, some retreating into the valleys, others frozen in the hall's grip, their breaths fogging the air in ragged clouds. Kyle lay crumpled at her feet, his traitor's dagger shattered beside him, the elder's whispers silenced by the truth her gift had carved into their souls. Blood pooled around him, dark and viscous, mingling with the vampire guard's own losses, the scent of iron and pine thick as a shroud. Alara's vision blurred at the edges, not from weakness, but from the surge of her Pathfinder's essence. The Deuce's hidden weave pulsing in her veins like a second heartbeat. She felt it all. The pack's rejection as a wound deeper than claws. Thorn's ambition twisted by lies into a chain that bound them all. Lyrian's eternal remorse, his queen's blood echoing in every shadow he cast. A curse that sapped the spire's ancient strength. "Forgive?" Thorn rasped, his voice breaking like ice under a thaw, claws retracting as he dropped to one knee, the Alpha's pride crumbling under the weight of revelation. His eyes, once stormy with dismissal, now held the raw plea of a leader unmade. Guilt mirroring Lyrian's, a shared fracture born of betrayals they had both enabled. The pack murmured, their forms shifting uneasily, the howls fading into whimpers that echoed her own isolation's ache. Freedom tempted her still, a lone path into the wilds where no thrones or kin could scar her further, where the moon's indifference was mercy enough. She could walk away, leave the spire to its decay, the wolves to their wars, her blood unmingled with shadows that drank rather than howled. But Lyrian's gaze held her, red-rimmed depths softening with a tenderness that pierced the exile's walls she had built. In him, she saw not predator, but penitent, his ethical heart chained by duty, the scar at his throat a map of losses she alone could redraw. The love between them, resisted in the chamber's hush, rationalized as survival's illusion, now bloomed undeniable, a romantic flame kindled in tragedy's forge. It was no reward, this pull. It was proof, demanding she choose compassion over power, union over solitude. Her hand rose to the locket, fingers closing around the chain, the dried blood warming as if her mother's spirit urged her forward. What was rebirth, if not the sacrifice to heal the wounds that mirrored your own? The Deuce's symbols swirled in her mind, the crescent on her wrist igniting faintly, fire and blood entwining under the lunar gaze. "I choose mercy," Ilara whispered, her voice steady as the wind's cadence, cutting through the hall's suspended breath. She stepped forward, blood trailing like a crimson vow, and extended her palm toward Thorn. The Alpha hesitated, then clasped it, his warmth clashing with her resolve, a bridge forged in the heat of shared remorse. The locket's glow reignited, ethereal light spilling from her touch, weaving threads of lunar silver through the air. Visions cascaded once more, not as judgment, but as absolution. The pack's rejection transmuted into alliance, Kale's treachery exposed as the root of old feuds, Lyrian's curse unraveling, his queen's binding severed by the mingling of wolf blood and vampire shadow. Ilara felt the cost keenly, her essence draining into the weave, a sacrifice of vitality that left her swaying, the wound in her side flaring like holy fire. Pain bloomed visceral, the chill of Lyrian's world seeping into her core, but with it came healing. Thorn's guilt easing into bowed fealty. The spire's runes flaring to life along the walls, banishing the decay that had haunted its stones. Lyrian moved to her side, his arm encircling her waist with a gentleness that belied his strength. Fangs retracted in quiet reverence. "You are the Pathfinder," he murmured against her ear, his breath a cool caress carrying the scent of aged wine and frost. Redemption's queen, not by birthright, but by choice. Their bond sealed in that moment, a union of fire and ice, blood and moonlight, her warmth kindling his eternal night, his shadows shielding her wild heart. The pack knelt as one, howls rising in harmony with the vampire's resonant hum, a symphony under the blood moon that drowned out the wind's lament. Thorn rose last, his eyes meeting Lyrian's in wary accord, the rival Alpha's nod, a fragile piece born of her mercy. War's edge receded, replaced by the tentative thaw of destinies rewoven. Ilara leaned into Lyrian, the locket cooling against her skin, its purpose fulfilled, a symbol now of rebirth, not just exile's remnant. The hall's bloodstains gleamed under the moon's softening gaze, no longer omens of ruin but stains of renewal, where rejection had yielded to compassionate thrones. Pain lingered in her limbs, a reminder of the sacrifice, but so too did the quiet joy of acceptance, love's proof etched in every shared breath. Outside, snow began to fall, veiling the borders in white forgiveness, the uivos blending into the night's embrace. In this Renascimento, she was no longer the stumbling Omega. She was majesty claimed, her heart's rhythm syncing with the spire's revived pulse, a flame eternal against the frost. Yet as the moon dipped toward dawn, a spiritual whisper stirred in her soul. Every healing bore its echo of loss, every union its shadow of what might have been. Strength was not in the crown, but in the mercy to wear it, wounds and all. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.